school that isn't Takish's school. I gather.
Wow.
That's all I've got.
Katie is
You mean
definitely
School of
not
Hard
here.
Knocks?
Does Takish have a partner?
I mean, like, this round, but in general, yeah, like, if you know anyone, tell them to hit me up.
Hopkins,
Oh, I want to make
Yeah.
a
You can do it for this round.
Would anybody be opposed to me doing a It's a cake and yes.
an entire one?
It's church. Yeah, play with everything in this round. And chair.
Welcome to Drew Kanye West.
Went and looked at all
I
of
did it
those.
when super high, and then I thought, oh my god, Dan, you're good at this. And then I stopped being high, and then I stopped.
Is
the ironing board still on the island?
No.
So our four speakers of
We're in semis.
Practice one.
You gotta do something while Andrew tabulates so many things that takes so long.
No, we have to do something. Well, we encourage you to use POC session to end. We're going.
Oh, poor Jerusalem and Emma. Oh,
Jerusalem said she's going to get ass.
those poor gals.
Who's the other team that broke other than Emma Jerusalem?
Bulls and Nick.
That's the joke about long POC sessions.
What bias?
Some about 4
I know.
They
Look
told
at
me.
how many cheerleaders.
I know.
That's true.
I call busted.
You ready?
Make me proud, son.
Anything I don't want
How
to
many
do.
There's
No risk of anyone.
everyone's cool with letting them. Right.
I will not be timing.
Alright, I'm not that.
None of us are timing.
I'll
None of us are
time.
timing. Theory debate is discouraged.
No.
No.
I only vote on performance arguments. But,
If someone raps just 2 bars, you automatically win.
If that's what you're looking for, this is going to be a weird round.
if everyone raps 2 bars, then
It's a weird round around this town.
there we go. Although,
You probably need a little more than
Alright, I'll work at it. I'll work
I thought it was 2 bars. Short bars.
I get it.
Is that 2 bars?
Yeah. Weird rounds.
Chance would be crap.
What?
I
No,
don't think he would.
Crap.
he would definitely.
He's a man of God, okay? He's always crap. You're right.
Guys, Chance live tweets about his nephew's Wiz performance in, like, the Wiz. Like, he produced it, and, like,
There's a Florida song.
it's the cutest fucking
You listen
thing. And I'm just like, yes,
I like.
Yes,
I
Chance.
like-
Yes,
I like-
Chance. Absolutely, Chance.
Is anybody ready?
We're missing a person.
I have my flow ready.
It really needs partners. Yes, I can.
Oh, if you don't know Iron Man?
No! I need.
Can I?
Alright, Jenna, take my guns. Make me proud, son.
Alright, is everyone ready?
Yeah, I call this house to order and welcome Joda to give a speech.
Thanks.
Here.
So, before I start, I'd like to thank Dan for debating with me all weekend, which is to say today. It's been fun. Had a good run. This case is pretty special to us. We have a unique bond with it. This is the case that Malik and I ran on Dan and Harry, round 6 of Nats this year. So that's a lot of fun. Happy to run it again. Everyone ready? Case statement is as follows. It's fairly straightforward. We're running straight. It would be preferable to the status quo if the United States did not have hate crimes laws. And I can explain exactly what those are. So hate crimes laws increase the penalties for committing a crime against a person if that crime was committed against that person because of that person's actual or perceived race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability.
Here.
Here.
What is status quo?
So in 1994, a federal hate crime statute was passed that does like most of that shit. States, on the whole, have slight modifications to this in their own laws. That varies state by state. We would like to have like pretty broad principled debate about whether these are good or bad in general, given that most states are on approximately the exact same model. We don't think that the state-by-state variations are that important, but yeah, there's a 1994 federal statute that applies to federal crimes. It's basically that.
So most states have the same model. What does that model look like?
What I just described, the federal model. Most states have modeled their own laws on the federal model.
And the federal model?
The one I just read to you. I can read it again.
Sure.
So, hate crimes laws increase the penalties for committing a crime against a person if that crime was committed against that person because of that person's actual or perceived
Cool.
race.
Sorry, real quick.
Yes.
Extend punishment. Give me the range. The bottom and probably top, and then probably the median would be great.
So I don't really like the precise statistics, and I think it probably varies by state too. There is no instance I'm aware of a hate crime elevating something that wouldn't have been capital punishment to capital punishment. I'm pretty sure that does not exist. Other than that, I mean, it's a substantial increase in a lot of cases. Like, it could add a decade to a prison sentence.
So, okay, so is that minimum? Median?
No, it's not. I mean, so this literally varies state by state. It also depends on like what the judge like decides, because the judge has discretion.
So a judge has discretion in this.
Yeah, like all sentencing except for capital sentencing, the judge
Right.
has discretion.
So,
But generally, what happens? They're like, okay.
Okay, so like a person is charged with so the prosecution. If the person commits a crime, the prosecution can decide to charge them with the crime, and in the instance that the prosecution wants to, they can also decide to charge them with the hate crime enhancement on that crime if they feel they have the evidence, right? Then a jury can convict them of either the crime itself or the crime with the hate crime enhancement. If the jury convicts them of the crime with the hate crime enhancement, then the judge will look to a different portion of the federal sentencing guidelines to sentence the person given the hate crime enhancement, right? So the person will have a significantly longer sentence.
so the judge does have an ability to make decisions,
Yeah,
that vary, but given that they're looking at federal guidelines when setting up the punishment, what we're asking is if the judge said they're going to get 30 minutes and a timeout, that would probably not be
never
okay.
happens.
So we want to find the bottom, medium.
So this also varies crime by crime, right? So like a very, very minor hate crime is different from like a hate crime that entails murder, right?
It would be a minor hate.
Okay, like, let me just like try an example that might help clarify a little bit. Like, let's say someone graffitis the side of a building.
So that's probably hate speech, not a hate crime.
No, but like not so like, and then later we find out he did it because he like hates the owners because of their race or something.
Oh,
How
I'm
if
still
you
not
get-
sure though. That's
I don't think property crime is.
yeah,
yeah.
that's usually not a so like
So it
hate
has to
crimes
be
are-
done to the bottom.
yeah, they're typically like assault, battery, theft in very weird instances,
Murder, obviously.
murder obviously.
So it's damage done to the body. It's mostly assault, right?
That most frequently it's
What
assault,
is the
yes.
minimal charge of violence done upon a body that you would say we're okay using the federal statute of hate crimes
What do you
and
mean
use that as a
minimal charge?
punishment?
Like how bad an assault?
Well,
So,
battery is
I mean-
the low end of the assault.
So 30,
Right.
so 30 minutes would not be a proper punishment. We would say that would be too little. What is little enough that you're okay
So, like,
saying?
We're defending punishing them more because they were hate motivated. Like, the actual amount is probably not relevant. So, like, whatever you want to defend as a punishment, like, we would defend a little bit more than that, or probably a significant amount more than that.
I thought you were defending that didn't have.
Oh, sorry, yes, the other way around.
Juno, don't fuck with me.
Sorry, yes. So, often we run this case off choice. That's why I'm somewhat confused. I'm also very tired. We would defend not punishing them that much more.
Okay, so because we are punishing them, we really, really need to understand how we're punishing them and how
So,
much
like,
we're punishing them.
As long as you defend punishing them significantly more than we are defending punishing them on account of the fact that the crime was hate motivated, that's your ground.
And before we can understand that, tell us what significant means.
So like, it's in the worst cases, it is a decade or more, right?
The
Like,
worst is 10 years.
I mean, I don't know if it's the absolute worst. So the federal sentencing guidelines don't look like that. So for instance, it could be like at a minimum 15, right? Like, it's probably not the case that the worst hate crimes conviction has added 15 years. It's probably the case that the worst hate crimes conviction has added, I don't know, more than that significantly. But this is down to the judge's discretion. I mean, presumably it's a principled debate on whether or not it's okay to punish more.
let me ask the question this way, I guess, to kind of get, I think, what you're trying to get at. Would it be reasonable to say in most of these cases where the crime is like low-level assault or something, the person maybe gets an extra 2 or 5 years, and then when it's higher level stuff, 10 to 15,
That
or
sounds-
maybe more?
That sounds pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah, and also, like, Jonah, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's your case, but, like, we're taking the, like, hate crime enhancements, no thank you, sir. Like, well, I'm more than fine at least having op defend, like, you know, like, like, not trivial, like, 30 minutes at a timeout, but, like, however, you can make it as much,
Yeah, I mean,
or
like,
as
mostly-
relatively little as you want, as long as you're making the principal claim that we are going to add what a reasonable person would consider to be a significant amount of punishment. So you don't have to follow the federal guidelines, but as long as it's, like, a significant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. When did hate crime get introduced? Hate crime laws get introduced in the United States?
1994.
1994.
There was nothing on the books before then?
There may have been some state-level statutes, but it wasn't like a thing.
What was the impetus for the passing of the law?
I think it was a hate crime.
Right.
I don't know exactly, but like there were some pretty awful race-based crimes in the 90s, and there was the political will to do this. It's probably not relevant to the principal clash.
Okay.
I mean, the laws.
How many people on average every year get convicted with hate crime?
I do not know. It's like a reasonable number. Like we want to have a round with some clash. So let's assume it's a significant number.
So here's my problem with having the clash argument right now. If I don't know the bright line of what is significant damage, okay, then we don't need to listen to federal guidelines. Then I also don't know the patterns of when judges actually get to use this tool outside of the philosophical after round we're about to have. So the amount of times that they utilize this on individuals on the
frequently
year
enough
has things to do with, like, I don't know, preventing other people through deterrence, or people.
So let's assume that like it's enough to have an impact. Like it's a significant number of people. Like whatever you consider a significant number of people to be. Like this round does have clash. We're not going to like dump spec about the criminal justice system on you. We're going to make arguments about political theory and the structure of society.
I just have a few questions about that.
Yeah.
So, like, generally what happens in these situations is these crimes are generally violent.
Yeah.
That is true. I'm just trying to think which of my head is something I missed that I would be curious about. A lot of preference status quo, the U.S. didn't have hate crime laws. And in status quo we do. They're used relatively often and are like significant enough to matter in this round. And and overall, do you know anything about who tends to get convicted under these laws? Like genders, races, etc.
I know that. I think the majority of hate crimes in the U.S. are actually committed against Jews. At least they were very recently. But it's certainly like, I mean, we can think of plenty of crimes that have been charged as hate crimes recently, right? So like Dylan Roof's attack on the Emmanuel AME Church was charged as a hate crime and he was convicted of a hate crime. The bombings of the Sikh houses of worship in Michigan 2 years ago were tried and convicted as hate crimes. There's been, I mean, a massive amount of anti-Muslim crime in the past 2 years that has been tried and convicted as hate crimes. It's generally stuff like that. It's generally people affiliated with groups like the KKK.
This is our last one. Just has there, to your knowledge, been situations where it was like ambiguous if it was intentionally a hate crime, or is it usually pretty clear cut?
So like, I mean, the evidence of whether or not it was a hate crime can vary in its robustness. Certainly.
Yeah. What is the standard? What is the burden?
Well, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, just like anything else in the criminal justice system. Beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed the crime because they hated this group. But like, so like things that often fit that description, right? So like they might have a diary in which they keep hateful journal entries, right? They might have painted a swastika at the scene of the crime. They might have a historic group affiliation with a hate group. They might have friends who testify that they are hateful people and did this because they are hateful.
Are they really your friends, though?
They might have enemies that testify. Like, I mean, I think it is probably true that it is often the case that people commit hate crimes and prosecutors do not charge them with hate crimes because they have insufficient evidence. That probably happens pretty frequently. Yeah, like, nonetheless, this occurred.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, fun. All right, everyone ready? We have 3 independent points. First, hate crimes laws are antithetical to liberal values and are thus unjust. They abridge freedom of conscience, first of all. Hate crimes laws increase criminal sentences beyond what is typical for a given crime solely because that crime was motivated by hateful sentiments. This means quite literally that they punish people for the thoughts in their head. Liberal societies, we tell you, may not punish citizens merely for the things that they happen to think. The reason individuals enter into societies is to allow them to more easily pursue their conceptions of the good by giving them access to certain resources, among them collective security and competitive markets, that can only be provided in the social context. In doing so, individuals surrender some of their autonomy to society. They can no longer steal property on a whim, and now they have to pay taxes. That said, no individual would ever consent to surrender their freedom of conscience to their government because freedom of conscience is required to pursue one's conception of the good, insofar as freedom of conscience is required to be able to have one's own conception of the good in the first place. Thus, infringing upon freedom of conscience would mean eliminating the source of the government in question's legitimacy, the reason its citizens permit its existence in the first place. Therefore, we would tell you that just as governments may never force individuals to adopt a given idea, they may never penalize individuals for adopting a given idea. Could hate crimes laws be punishing for any other reason? No. If it were the case that hate crimes laws were meant to punish people for anything related to the material impact of the crime, they would adjust punishment on the basis of that impact. Maybe they would consider the social effects or emotional trauma caused by a crime. But hate crimes laws don't do that. Instead, they care only about what was in the criminal's head when they committed the crime. We think, therefore, that OP has to defend the principle that governments can and indeed should violate their citizens' freedom of conscience on a regular basis. This is horrific. Where's the bright line? If OP's government can ban hating certain groups, can it ban hating capitalism? Can it imprison communists? Can it require people to be Republicans? If not, why not? Now, we recognize that in some cases, courts should consider people's thoughts related to crimes they commit. Intent is one example, but hatred is distinct. Determining intent is often necessary to adjudicate whether or not a crime occurred at all, because our judicial system is based on the moral theory that individuals are only culpable for events to the extent that they intended to bring them about, and therefore may only be held responsible or punished in cases when intent is present. Hatred is different. Like any other reason why a person might decide to do something, it doesn't affect their culpability for doing it. Therefore, there's no reason why courts would have to consider it. Moreover, though, we would tell you that considering hatred requires making a moral determination that the government simply cannot make. It's illogical to hold any one motive for committing a crime as objectively worse than any other motive. We would never punish people who rob a bank because they want to buy a Ferrari, any more than we punish people who do so because they want to buy a mansion. So why do we punish crimes motivated by hatred more than we punish crimes motivated by envy? Or for that matter, why do we punish crimes motivated by hatred of a group more than we punish crimes motivated by hatred of a person? It makes little sense. Second independent point. Hate crimes laws are self-defeating in their attempts to combat hatred. First, they create a dangerous sense of false solvency. They drive hatred underground, causing hateful criminals to pretend they're committing crimes for other reasons. This means that over time, hate crimes laws render themselves unenforceable. But additionally, we should prefer hatred to be out in the open anyway. We tell you that society needs to be aware of the hatred that exists within it. This is necessary to make change possible. There can be no excuse for denying the existence of racism or misogyny. We tell you that, as awful as it is, overt hatred is one of the only ways it's possible to galvanize broad support across society for essential reforms advancing the interests of oppressed communities. But if you make it possible for people to deny that a crime was hate-motivated, we've seen repeatedly that they will. This is particularly important because violent extremism is not responsible for the vast majority of structural oppression facing oppressed communities today. Rather, the bulk of the problems are systemic, not personal, and fixing them is easier on our side of the house. We tell you that hate crimes laws create the pernicious misconception that racism only exists when a person shoots up a church. This slows change by suggesting that not being personally hateful is sufficient to avoid moral culpability for oppression. This is false. Everyone who buys into oppressive systems supports structural oppression. You don't have to hate to be responsible. On top of this, however, hate crimes laws don't even effectively reduce hate crimes. We have 7 reasons why. 1, it's easy to hide your motives from these laws if you want to avoid punishment. 2, even if the criminal in question is hateful, it's almost impossible to determine whether hatred was the sole motivating factor behind the crime they committed. 3, even if hatred was the sole motivating factor, was it hatred of a group because of its group status, or just hatred of individuals? Only the former is a hate crime. 4, what if the person disavows their hatred entirely during their trial and claims to be reformed? 5, what if they're lying? 6, you cannot deter hatred. It isn't behavior behavioral. It's ingrained, socialized, and overwhelming. Trying to deter hatred would be like trying to deter love. It's absurd. 7. You cannot fix hatred through longer prison sentences. Those just breed resentment, which will be capriciously taken out on the hated community in the criminal's mind, producing more hatred across society. Our last independent point is that hate crimes laws undermine the judicial system. We have 3 reasons why. First, the fact that extended sentences neither deter nor rehabilitate hatred is particularly important because it means that hate crimes laws must serve a merely retributive end. This is antithetical to the purpose of the criminal justice system. The purpose of the criminal justice system is to apply an objective standard of justice in the reduction of crime. Such retribution is inconsistent with this purpose. Retribution, by definition, doesn't help to reduce crime, and it cannot be meted out according to any objective standard. Therefore, the judicial system may not seek to exact it on criminals. In order for retribution to be legitimate, we as a society would have to be entitled to just deserts after being harmed. There are 2 problems with this. First, the criminal justice system, consisting of mere humans, and not even ones with PhDs in philosophy, is not equipped to determine if a criminal is sufficiently morally defective to entitle us to cause them pain for the exclusive sake of our pleasure, much less to determine how much such punishment would be warranted. Second, there is no possible moral entitlement to just deserts. There is never a right to see harm done to others simply because one experienced injury oneself. That would suggest that for a given punch, a delicate person would be entitled to see their assailant punished more than a durable person. Moreover, it's impossible for an assailant to predict in advance in advance of punching a person whether they are delicate or durable, so that information cannot be incorporated into their intentions with respect to the attack, making it an illegitimate grounds on which to accord punishment. Further, we tell you that this particular retribution is especially pernicious because it's retributive not on the basis of how a person acted, but on the basis of who that person is, because what we believe is fundamental to our identity. Our judicial system is built on the idea that acts may be criminal, but people may not, that you will never be punished merely for who you are. This corrupts that foundation. Second, under this, hate crimes laws increase opportunities for actors within the judicial system to act on biases against against the same oppressed groups the law professes to protect. Prosecutors will be more likely to charge a homophobic black man who attacks a gay individual with a hate crime than they would be if he were white. Juries will be more likely to convict him of a hate crime because he is black, and judges will use the hate crime charge as a justification to disproportionately increase his jail sentence on account of his skin color alone. By giving these actors additional discretion to increase prison sentences, hate crimes laws become nothing more than another means through which society's systemic biases can manifest within the judicial system to the detriment of oppressed groups. Third, they undermine judicial credibility. Because it's so hard to identify hatred and its causal status relative to individual crimes, hate crimes laws make sentencing seem inconsistent. This makes the sentences of terrible criminals seem arbitrary, giving defenders of those criminals room to rally, which in a world where hate crimes laws work will only facilitate the spread of more hate. For all of these reasons, we are oh so proud to propose.
I now call upon the Honorable Daniel Kobos to give a speech, not to exceed however long we've decided speeches are called for.
Is anyone timing? I'm timing here, guys. Go ahead.
We're keeping it to normal time, right? Just.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
None of us are timing, so I'll count for you. Don't worry.
Thank you.
We're ready? Let's speak about the role that government has in determining when liberal ideas should be protected, when its people are being stripped from their rights, and what happens when individuals in society are able to create narratives, are able to create symbols, and are able to make people into not people. Because that is the reason why hate crime laws exist. It is individuals telling other individuals that I can commit assault on your body. I can strip away your rights because you are different than me. And because you are different than me, that means that you are below me, meaning you are subhuman. We are very comfortable inside opposition saying that this is the type of behavior that government should punish even greater than just a normal crime. Because it is not just a crime of me going to another person and hurting them. It is saying that that is not a person. That person doesn't have rights. That person is different. And when I attack that person, what that signifies is that other people like them can suffer of the same consequences as well. Remember, it is not just the role of the job to run the machine of the government, but also to speak to its public and say through norms and values, this is what we accept and this is what we do not accept. On side opposition, we do believe that hatred and definitive hatred is something that should be considered. If you kind of listen to a lot of what the government tells you, you'd probably be scared that this gets used a lot, or it's not very effective, or you don't really know how to use it. We're saying that you're right, the burden is pretty high. If we meet that burden, we get those people to be in jail longer. The most hateful, fucked up individuals of society now get that punishment. They don't get it on their side of the house. What about the people in the middle line? What if you don't really know if they committed the hate crimes? Well, if they can't really prove it, then they won't get punished with those things, and therefore justice is done properly because it is the job of the prosecutor to present the case that is available to the jurors to understand in order to prosecute the individual. So we are okay with people not being punished by this, but even the mere fact that they are going through the system, being questioned by this, and we are able to say that in the justice system, we can ask these things. Did you just hurt this individual because they're a woman, because they're black, because they're Latino, because they're Asian? If there's any of those things, we're going to punish you more. And do we want to see it in the open versus in the shadows? We think it is very dangerous for people to be out in the open and say things like Mexicans are rapists, and that's all that we are sending. We think that kind of norm and that kind of conversation is dangerous because more people feel comfortable not just saying it in their smoky basement. You didn't take me, bro. Sit down. Not only did people are people not doing it in their smoky basement, in the echo chamber, now on their side of the house, they feel open to tell it to a candidate and say, I really do hate these immigrants. And the candidate's like, yo, me too. Let's go for it. When they normalize that type of conversation in which they create categories of subhumans in America, they can't win the round by simply saying, guys, this doesn't sound too liberal for me, when the lives are at stake. And that is our first point. When you dehumanize, it is the ultimate crime. Why? Any human in society needs full access to that society in which they are part of, in which they pay taxes from, in which the government has told them you have affirmative rights to exist in the world. When another individual says, no, you are not a human, you do not have those rights, the government needs to act and protect those individuals. That is why we have things like protected classes, right? According to these guys, we really shouldn't have protected classes because it is giving unfair treatment to one group or another. Here is the question in this round. Can we properly determine something that is correct and something that is not? Me and Pavi are never going to get up here and tell you we know all of the answers about the criminal justice system or where to draw the line about how hate crimes are good or bad. But what we are saying is there are cases where it is very evident, it is very intuitive, and it is very clear that the evidence shows that hate crimes do exist, that they are pernicious to minority communities, and overall they create a norm for individuals to separate themselves. If that is the truth, then the government can create structures within it to make sure that it checks for that, because it can't rely on the legislative, right? The legislative relies on democratic will from those individuals that, guess what? They're being structurally disadvantaged from advancing the ballot, so they can't go through legislative to change. What about the judicial? That's another whole issue of getting legal representation. We make it easier for these individuals to go through the judicial system by giving them an extra avenue. How other way would they get a lawyer to take on their case if they're like, you know what, it's just assault, so I don't know if it's going to really work out. But if there's a diary that says, I hate black people, then that becomes a lot easier for the person to actually get justice for the crime that was done upon them. They don't get that on their side of the house. We think reducing people to nothing means they are more vulnerable. Let's advantage those who are being targeted by society and those who we believe have a responsibility to protect. Remember, this is an argument that the government already has said that we will protect you, we will make sure nothing happens to you, and if we fail, we'll find a way to fix it. If they can't fix it, because hate crimes are rampant and are really bad right now, they can't just say, let's remove it and see what happens. No, you need to have some other solution. Secondly, I want to talk about justice and the legal representation. It's really, really important. There's very little chance that you're going to get very good representation if you have less legal avenues to actually get the achievement of justice that you want. We added to individuals that are victimized. We also think that if you don't do this, if you want to talk about shadows, talk about extrajudicial justice. If no longer is it relevant for a man to say, I hate black people and I literally beat the shit out of a black person, if they don't see an extra crime, an extra punishment being added to the individual, it's going to happen in the streets. And what happens then? Other people of the same minority group, out of frustration that their government is not able to have their back, criminalize themselves because now they apply the justice that they thought should have happened in the first place from the government, but never does. We think that's really bad. Thirdly, we want to signal to society the normative standards that we want to create for it. We want to say that what we are saying is correct. What we want to say is that officially, on the books, according to the law, things like hate crimes will not be accepted and need to be punished. They need to tell us what happens when the government does this. What does it signal to individuals on the ground when it says this is no longer a relevant factor when it comes to speaking about your ability to stay safe or if there was actual justice happening upon you. Let's get to the on case. They talked about liberal values. They talked about conscience of thought, and they're like, look, like government legitimacy has the protection of thought. Palvi and I are not saying go to a random, like, I don't know, like place on the internet, find a guy who says N-word and put him in jail, right? Like, no, you can think whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. Like we said in POCs, this only deals with bodily harms, right? So every single argument they give you about how you feel, how you think, and the things that are inside of you, that's fine. You can be whatever kind of asshole you want in America. That's why America is great. If you take the next step, though, and you do commit the next crime, that is where we want to get involved in saying that intent was created. And then they say no, but there's no real way that you can know if this was a tipping point, if like it was because they hated black people, why they beat up black people. Well, you don't really know if murder was planned out or if it was a spur of the moment thing. But gee, we kind of allow people to decide that all the time. And the consequences of those things is capital punishment. We literally murder people upon the lack of information that we have from jurors. So you either can never do these types of convictions and you only allow the judge to do it, or you believe in the jury system. I didn't see a lot of arguments about whether the jury system would be bad. So if they can trust it in much bigger cases that have much worse punishment, we think we should allow it for this incident. They said that hatred does not add culpability. Remember, it's also beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not just okay to say that I kind of don't like black people. There needs to be a tie between the thoughts and the crime. In the cases that are brutal and awful, in which they do, we put these people in jail for longer and they don't. Secondly, they say it drives the hate underground. We say it's really way worse when it's normalized in the open, when more and more people feel comfortable saying these things in the open. They say it's easy to hide. Like maybe if they're hiding their views, I guess that's also like good. If they're not conversing about why these ideas are good with other individuals, it doesn't reinforce it. Finally, about retribution, they're basically saying like you really shouldn't punish other individuals for this type of thing. We think if it's brutal enough, it is just. We're proud to oppose.
Here, here.
I now call upon the Right Honorable Daniel Takish to give a speech not to exceed, again, however long we're speaking for.
Here. I don't know how honorable I am, but all my friends would absolutely describe me as right. Politics and accuracy. Anyway, sorry. Wow, that was. Can we cut? Never mind. All right.
Let's get stronger.
Fair enough.
Let us get drunk.
Shall we?
1 second.
Everybody ready?
And go.
All right. I want to ask you a rhetorical question, but I also invite POCs. I promise I'll take one. Look, insofar as I do not think any single person in this room, any reasonable person, is going to believe that it was only after Donald Trump made his announcement speech in May of 2015 that all of a sudden we didn't like Mexicans and everything like that in this country, that all of a sudden the Republican Party went absolutely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. We think that is nonsense. As a matter of fact, a large number of commentators, both smart and those on The Daily Show, would go ahead and say that Donald Trump is the candidate. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Trevor Noah. That Donald Trump is the candidate that the Republican Party has been producing for a long time. We have a phrase for this. It's called dog whistle politics. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that these beliefs are latent for a reason. As a matter of fact, we do not want the suppression of this speech. When Kobos comes up here in LOC and says we want people to keep these beliefs underground, no, because we want these beliefs out in the open. It is only when people mobilize that you can effectively counter-mobilize against it. In order to say we want to keep this speech underground is to believe that these people can never ever be reached, is to believe that these people never can ever be persuaded, or that it's impossible to interact with these ideas. No, we believe that these people are so extraordinarily, these ideas are so dangerous that they must be out into the open, be brought out in the open, and they must be discussed. Because what does it say about us as a society if somebody says blacks are inferior and we say, you know what, I can't deal with that, just stop talking, because I can't deal with that argument. That being said, let's see.
let's just see what he goes into here. He talks about how it's so extraordinarily repugnant, and that's how exactly we want to do. We categorize different crimes and everything like that. Right. But here's the thing. The causal mechanism that he identifies is rather curious. If it is in fact the thought that if it is the thought that motivates the crime, we convict an individual for the particular crime. We think the causal mechanism is exactly backward. It is the ability to commit crime rather than the reason that someone commits crime that is significantly more dangerous, and that is something that we ought punish. It is not whether or not we like this person's motive, but whether or not they are willing to act upon the motive and act upon the feelings that actually come from it. That is what we should differentiate upon. That is what we ought be able to punish. But more importantly, again, in order to say that these beliefs are so bad that they punish, again, that is to go ahead and say that we think beliefs should be punished. Kobos comes startlingly close, and he flirts with the idea of saying restrictions on the First Amendment in terms of speech. He says when we want to push this speech away, that's what we ought to do. What Menlo needs to come up here and say is why they believe this principal distinction is for crime is perfectly acceptable, but just general discourse is fine, insofar as their whole hog advocacy is we want to get this speech out of the discourse. But finally in his overview, he goes up and says, this is only the most awful people that we can make. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and defend racism, people. Or not defend racism, rather, but defend racists. Do you really think that any reasonable person that anyone behind the veil of ignorance would choose to live in the type of, material conditions in which most, fucking Klansmen or whoever grow up in? No. We're going to go ahead and say that this type of cultural backwardness and ignorance is likely bred by rather pernicious cultures. If anything, we should be trying to help these people. Poverty and ignorance have a strikingly high correlation, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to go ahead and say, no, the only reason that these people don't like blacks or gays or something like that is because they're backwards and evil and every single, one of their kin is positively evil. No, we think that's completely asinine. We think we need to recognize that these people come from extraordinarily different cultures and they have beliefs that we should correct, that we should school all of their asses on, but that we should still offer some type of tolerance and recognize that, quite frankly, in many instances, it is its upbringing. So the first actual point he talks about is why it's dehumanizing, and dehumanizing is the most important is the most important thing they should do, because you need to protect the right of the individual to exist. Right, absolutely. It's not right, absolutely. We still go after these people 100%. Do you really think that people would have prosecuted Dylan Roof any less by the nature of his crime? No. We think the high-profile nature of it did it, so we do not necessarily need hate crime statutes to actually pursue it. In order for this argument to hold any water, he would need to go ahead and say that we protect these people less, and we would protect these people, we prosecute their attackers less without these hate crime statutes. That doesn't make any sense. But more than that, they go ahead and say, we have such an obligation to that. Not only do we need to protect them, we do, when you get assaulted and call 911, the cops will come and the prosecutor will prosecute. But they say, we need to find a way to fix this particularly specially. This is such an asinine way to fix it. Like I said, the beliefs expressed by Donald Trump vocally have been latent in this country for a long-ass time. And the type of prejudice that breeds hate crimes, the hate crimes are quite frankly just the tip of the iceberg, in terms of, I'll get you in a moment, and I promise. But you're going to want to sit down, but I promise I'll get you. Insofar as this is the case, we think hate crime statutes are such an olive branch, such a tiny pittance to throw to actually resolving racial justice, to actually resolving these serious issues. If you believe, we sentenced these 1 out of 100 guys that maybe would be up for bat on a hate crime statute, for 5 more years in prison, congrats everyone, racial justice achieved, we think it's bullshit. We think we should take away on our side of the house the pat on the back that prosecutors and the judicial system give to people when they're able to convict someone of a hate crime and actually go about solving very serious iniquities in the justice system. I promise and I deliver.
Why do you think so many people in Donald Trump rallies and in events do they feel more comfortable than outside of attacking minorities, assaulting individuals, screaming at them?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So, in Donald Trump rallies, at least I have seen, people attack, embarrass, yell, and get into confrontations with people that are minorities, women, Muslims, etc. That type of action we have seen in those.
Right, okay. So why do people feel comfortable being violent? Absolutely, we think that is a problem. But number one, that is at the root of the idea. Simply because you have a hate crime law isn't solving hate crime. You yourself said that in a remarkably high number of instances, what would be qualified as a hate crime just isn't going to go prosecuted for lack of evidence. But more importantly, I think that greater emphasizes the idea that we need to address serious, more structural ways that racism and all sorts of prejudice embed themselves in our society. society. But finally, could you imagine the field day the Trump campaign office would say is, oh, my political supporter got, 3 more years in prison because of some, because of some statute signed by my opponent's husband, Bill Clinton. I'm sorry, I had to jump on that opportunity. But you understand what I'm saying. Or even if you don't necessarily see it as just politically, it's optically horrible. The second thing they talk about is Next thing to talk about how is justice. They say these individuals have fewer resources. So when you're the victim of a crime, you get the resources of this nifty new thing called the state behind you. You have basically a bottomless vat of money. Well, not true. The government does, and they're going to go after that. So that argument doesn't actually hold. They say it's going to happen in the street. No. What happens is we see riots in the street when cops who shoot young black men don't get convicted at all. Why? Because there are all sorts of far more deeply ingrained, far more complicated forms of prejudice in our system, and you think just passing a hate crime statute is going to do anything. You're kidding yourself. But the final thing you talk about is why we think we want to signal very explicitly that it's bad. Right. Signal that it's bad by addressing it at its root. Do not signal that it's bad by violating one of the most core tenets of a liberal society, that being freedom of conscience. Make it abundantly clear that we do not care what you think. Once you have crossed this line, once you have expressed the fact that you are willing to actually physically harm someone that you disagree with or something like that, that is not okay. If on their side of the house they're saying when you commit a hate crime, you're doing it because you're dehumanizing him. If I just beat up Jonah because I don't like the cut of his jib, what am I saying? According to that causal mechanism that they've laid out, I'm saying, you know what? I think Jonah's less of a human, not because he's Jewish or anything, but just because I think he's pissing me off. That's what every crime is. Think you have the right to commit force or something against the person. So the first thing we talk about is freedom of conscience. They say bodily harm, cover on off case. The second thing we talk about is how the differentiation between intent and motive. He says we already do this, but let's make something abundantly clear. Intent is whether or not you're willing to go through with an action. Motive is why you would be willing to go through an action. We should correct for intent, similar to the way we correct for externalities, but we only correct for externalities in proportion to how actually damaging they are, not exactly the source of them. But the final thing we want to talk about is why we think it's necessarily self-defeating. Not only is it more likely to prejudice, but it's likely to create this type of backlash, and when we win, it only creates a type of false signal that we've done a damn thing about racism. Proud to propose.
Here. I now call upon the final constructive speaker, the Honorable...
Are you okay?
Very honorable.
I'm sorry, I started to yawn. I was afraid I was going to yawn through your name. It's okay. Pallavi. I actually know your last name. Sorry.
It's okay. Is everyone ready?
I lost. Don't worry about it. Good job.
So I want to start off with the fact that Dan gets up here again and again and says, you don't fix everything when you do this. We agree. We don't fix everything. But we think we set some kind of norm up that tells people this kind of behavior is not okay. Because I actually think the Donald Trump example is really relevant and they don't deal with the nuance of it, right? Because we don't contest that these bad people always existed. What we are saying is when you have Trump go on TV and say, yeah, Mexicans are murderers and rapists and it's totally cool, everyone's like, I think that too. It's okay to think that now. Great. We think, and when you encourage that culture, you don't fix these problems. Like, think about the number of attacks that happen at these rallies. Because they keep saying, it's words. You have a right to just say this kind of stuff and let this kind of stuff happen. But people get beaten up at these rallies. Like, there's a reason there's a higher rate of transgendered murders each year. It is because we are not changing the culture at the point at which you just tell people, when Donald Trump is up there and it's okay to hate transgendered people, you see more of this stuff on their side of the house. We think that is the fundamental problem with their case. But the second thing I don't think they really deal with is the individual, right? Because they get up here and they're like, it's not retributive, it's not about that person. But it is, right? Like, if I get beaten up and the guy, like, calls me, like, I did it because you were a Jew while I beat me, or, like, some kind of, like, slur while they do it, I think that does require a higher level of justice. I think fundamentally there are harms to the individual that matter in this round, and given that, we probably should value those harms. I don't think they can just get up here and say, it's only about the principles. What happens to those people matters too, and I think they're trying to wash over that in a lot of their case. Let's deal with this. So the first argument we give you is the role of government. And we tell you that, like, individuals telling each other I can strip rights of you is not something we all allow. Because they try to make this distinction of, like, it's just words, it's just words. No, it is not. Like, it is words that have actions and intent, right? You did not just say it to this person. You did a hate crime onto them. You bodily harmed them. At that point, that is the distinction, right? Like, I don't think that is I think that's fairly intuitive. Then they say, we tell you that the burden is high on purpose. And they say basically, like, you differentiate different types of crimes. Yes, we do differentiate different types of crimes. When you have that kind, I'll take you in between cases. But when you have a kind of crime where you literally harm someone in this way, that is a different standard than when you have one where, like, say you say something bad. That is why there are differentiating levels of punishment for different things. But we value the individual's autonomy. We value their ability to interact in society. At the point at which your rights are impeding on someone else's, you don't get that right anymore. Like, that is part of what it means to live in a social contract. Then we tell you, like, norms of this kind of conversation are bad, and like things Trump says matters. And they say racism is bred by like a pernicious culture, but they don't solve for it all on their side of the house, right? Because I think literally all we have to win in this round is that if we can show that some people are deterred because of this, someone thinks twice about like beating up someone because of their race, somebody thinks twice about doing a hate crime because of this law. I think that's all we need to do, and I think it's very easy to show that, right? Because the fact of the matter is people die in hate crimes. People people are literally impaired for the rest of their lives because of these crimes, and that matters. And given that, I think it's totally fine to add a higher level of punishment, given this person would not have attacked that person if it weren't for like racial or gender or whatever biases. We don't want to tell people those biases are okay because they create cycles of violence where more people think that way, and that is the problem. So then what do we tell you? We tell you dehumanization is the ultimate crime. Like, that's why we have protected classes and stuff, and they never really engage with this argument. Like, if protected classes are fine, this should be fine too. Then we tell you, like, we are owed protection. They say, like, you can still go after them, you can still punish them for the crime, but it's the message you send about their behavior. We're telling them this is not okay. Then we tell you it creates a norm of separation and violence, don't respond. We tell you it's easier for them to go through the judicial system. And they say, it's just a little thing, right? But here's the thing. It actually matters because it shows that it's like, even if it only has 1 year, but they tell you can even add 10. We think at that point you actually send the message that, like, this matters and it's something we're willing to engage with. And we tell you there's a responsibility to you. And they're like, oh, but what about, like, Trump? If you found out you were punishing a Trump supporter for doing something like this, they have a field day. Like, no, we would not punish the Trump supporter for a sign. If he goes and beats up someone and calls them the N-word while he's doing it, we'll punish them. I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with that. Then we tell you, like, there are legal avenues that you can pursue, right? We tell you, like, extraditional justice and all this stuff. And they say, like, people, like, you get riots and stuff in the street. But the problem is that, like, I don't think they deal with, like, the core of this argument, which is the fact that, like, a lot of prosecutors won't take cases they don't think they can win, right? But this is an added incentive of what they can win, right? Because there are hate crimes statutes, if it's usually some level of, I said I take in between cases. So given that, we think that there actually is, like, a reason to have this, plus you increase the avenues, right? Like, because the thing is, like, quite frankly, a lot of people who get stuck in these situations are not super educated on their crimes, on their, like, their rights, don't know all the avenues they can pursue. Giving them one more way to access the system is probably a good thing, because they're probably the people who have the most reason to protect. Given that, and then the final thing we say is you have to signal normative standards. They say this doesn't actually change it, and they keep harping on this idea that this doesn't actually change anything, but they don't, like, engage with the fact that A, someone's probably thinking twice, B, you have an obligation to these people at a core level. Like, at the point at which someone is, like, if someone in my family, like, got like, beaten up because of this crime, I do think they deserve a higher standard of punishment. If the only reason they got beaten up was because of their race or their gender. Sure, go ahead, Dan.
Sure. So, thinking twice, weighing costs and benefits of actions, these are things we commonly associate with rational people. Do we associate your average Klan with being a level-headed, rational, thinking adult?
So I think that, like, maybe, like, so I think that the distinction you're trying to draw is they're, like, all lunatics, but that's the thing, they're not. They can weigh things, too. Like, they can weigh the fact that I will get more punishment if I beat this person up, and they're less likely to do it. Maybe not everyone does it, right? Like, maybe some people still go through and still do the crime, right? But somebody stops. And that is fine. And if we stop one person, I think that's all we have to do on our side of the house. Because I think about one person and the harm that he does not now get inflicted on him matters. So given that, we think you signal normative standards when you tell people we are punishing you harder for what you did. Moving onwards. The first argument they give you is liberal values are violated. We tell you you are inflicting bodily harm, and this is very bad. We also tell you that, like, what happens in these situations is that it's not just speech, right? Because the thing is, when you tell people this is kind of like okay behavior, it does make them subhuman in their eyes, right? Like, that is why you see at Trump rallies people, like, calling the president the N-word and saying, like, very vile things about what they want to do to him and, like, the kinds of crimes they want to enact. It's when you make this kind of speech okay that they think it's okay, right? The distinction there is and also the greater distinction is everyone who's, like, a subject in one of these situations has acted, right? It's not like they just thought it and they were like, oh, like, he's that. They actually did something based off of this thought. Given that, that is the difference between a thought, because at the point at which my thoughts harm you, I have a right to get some kind of justice for that. So at that point, I don't understand what they're trying to make with the point here. Then they tell you this idea of false solvents, and they give a couple of points. They say you drive hate crimes underground. Kobos already tells you, like, you don't want to normalize them anyway, but also, like, they don't. Like, how do you drive a hate crime underground? Like, it's still a hate crime. You still did it. Like, maybe one person lies about it, but if we catch another person who's not lying, great. I'm happy with that. Like, you don't, like, in the margins, you get more benefits on our side of the house. Then they say, you want the hatred out in the open. Like, no, you don't. That's the problem right now. A lot of that hatred is out in the open. And we don't see these people getting more educated from it. It becomes something that they think is now normalized and okay. I don't think, like, I'm from North Carolina, guys. Like, I used to do canvassing during the Obama election. Let me tell you, when you come to them, like, they don't do that. They think it's okay to hate people because of the fact that they don't have, like, the way it is often in these kinds of, like, communities is by letting it out becomes normalized for them. They don't think it's different because everyone around them is saying it's okay now. When your whole community is saying it's okay, you think it's okay. That is the problem. So then they say, oh, like, we don't punish envy, but we punish hate. Like, hate is different. You have literally, like, done this because there's no way of the responsibility of this person. Then they say they want you to advance the interests of minorities. You do that better when you give them more avenues, you give them more means to get justice. That's probably something we can do better. Then they say bulk of the problems are systematic. Like, no, it's not because of the system that this guy committed a hate crime. It's because of things he thought and then acted on. That is why we're punishing it. Then they say everyone's a part of it, but, like, there has to be a line somewhere. At the point at which you literally harm someone, there's your line. Then they say don't punish them, but you don't punish them. They have like 7 reasons that you're not going to catch everyone. We're fine not catching everyone. Let's catch as many as we can. The last thing they say is it's bad for the judicial system, but I think the problem with this argument is, like, they just say that there's an objective standard to justice. There is not. Justice is fundamentally based off society's beliefs. We want a society that encourages good beliefs in its citizens, not bad ones. Don't allow hate crimes to be a normalized thing. Very proud to oppose.
Now enter to the rebuttal portion of our debate. All members of the panel will take all points of order under consideration and individually determine it. If a member of the panel has a question about that, they will ask it whenever they feel. Otherwise, we'll move on. Right, guys? Cool. Dan Kobos, go.
Dan asked an interesting question. What happens if the Klan hears about this? They're not very rational individuals. We agree, they're not very rational. And you know what? Some of them won't understand it. Some of them will say, you know what? I don't really care if the government thinks that black people are equal. I'm still going to hate black people, and that will be the reason why I attack them. In that instance, if they catch them, we put them in jail for longer for the crime. On side government, they don't. And they really don't see the big distinction, but we made it very clear. Once it is normal to dehumanize a specific part of society, it becomes easier for other individuals to do that crime. If I kill a Jonah, there is not another Jonah, so people can't be like, he hated Jonah, I want to kill myself a Jonah. But if I kill a black man because he is black, other people that also hate black people will say, they killed that black man, I can also kill another black man. And that is the extra crime that we talk about. When you facilitate society to understand that people are subhuman, we say that is a crime that the government needs to punish you for. And remember, it is thoughts and it is feelings, but it can't just be that. We told you that our burden is super high. It is beyond a reasonable doubt. We told you out of 10 cases, maybe we only get 1. But if that one case, A, creates deterrence for other individuals who don't want to go to jail for that long, B, signifies to minority communities that the government has their back, they're creating norms that will protect them, which engages them more with the community, and C, overall establishes a system in which we say the government needs to make structural changes when they have failed the people, something that never gets touched by Dan at all. The government has a right the government has a duty to protect people, because we said the only way that you're able to vote, live, and self-actualize is if you are protected, if your body is safe. And the government is supposed to protect you from that, but we told you there's an epidemic of these types of things. So when government fails a part of society, what does government do? It changes the structures to advantage those that are disadvantaged, like classes that are protected. That is how we're going to win this round, by explaining to to you that that extra punishment needs to be had, because what otherwise would happen is something they don't talk a lot about. Because we told you, in cases where obvious racism happens, we create justice. They say we still punish them, but they don't. And the problem is, now they don't even punish them for the original crime. What did we tell you? If a prosecutor sees an assault crime, they say, well, this crime might be a little difficult to adjudicate, I'm not going to take it, or I'm going to cut short and just cut a deal. But if there's also a diary that says, I hate black men, and now that can be admitted, now the prosecutor is more incentivized to take the case. That means in one case, one person got justice, and in the other one they didn't, even though the crime happened at the same time. So, overall, minority groups are able to get better representation by the legal system once they have more legal avenues, not only for the hate crime, remember, but any crime that happens to them. Also, they say, well, thoughts are really important. Well, words and thoughts always come before the crime. They're trying to change the chronology of things, but it's not how it works. It's not, I stab black man, and then I'm like, I hate black man. It needs to be the other way around, and that is the standard of beyond reasonable doubt that we have to meet. We have to say that this was a major reason, if not the only reason why this individual did this. It's not going to happen a lot, but we do it on our side of the house. We also said we create deterrence from actions and force conversations to be checked. And we say these types of things causes cycles of violence when they're just having conversations with yourself. They're like, no, it's not that much more. It's 10 years, so it's a lot. And they're just going to talk secretly. It is better than normalizing it outside and getting to other generations who are vulnerable to that type of mentality. We say, keep it to those people that already strongly believe it, but don't spread it to the public and say it's okay to have these types of thoughts. We said, and this goes cold dropped, if minority groups don't feel like they are being properly represented by the legal system, they're going to take justice upon their own hands, not responded once in this round. That creates two rights violations. First of all, for the individual being attacked outside of a fair trial, and second of all, to the individual who feels disenfranchised, now attacks that individual, and now becomes a criminal themselves, and therefore self-criminalizing. We think that's awful. At that point, you have so many rights violations that we can prevent on our side of the house, and even if they try to be philosophically consistent with thoughts and feelings, we're okay saying we're not okay with those thoughts and feelings if they lead to assault. We're proud to oppose.
Okay. I call upon the Prime Minister I call upon Jonah to deliver a speech for whatever length we've again determined. Yeah. I think it's 5:30. I swear to God, I promise I'm a debater.
Yeah, it's 5:30. It's summer. Summer's not real.
Everyone ready? Panel, I'd like to repeat to you something Pallavi told you in the MO, which is that violence against trans individuals has skyrocketed over the past several years. Note that hate crimes laws exist in the status quo. I wonder why they're not working. We have two RFDs. First, these are impermissible. This is the most important issue in the round, because if they're impermissible, the government cannot do them, even if they produce good results. Second, why they make life worse in substantial ways for oppressed communities, why they significantly increase oppression. Let's talk about why they're impermissible. So we tell you they violate freedom of conscience. We tell you this is impermissible because no one would consent to a society that violates freedom of conscience, because people consent to societies to achieve their conceptions of the good, but a government that violates freedom of conscience prevents people from being able to have their own conception of the good in the first place, which is impermissible. Why do these violate freedom of conscience? Because they punish people merely for thinking things in their heads. This is literally a violation of freedom of conscience. It is pointed out by OP that they punish people who think things and then act on them. This is true, but we would punish the actions X amount. We punish them X plus 2 because of the thoughts. The plus 2 is because of the thoughts. That's punishing them for the thoughts. They never beat that. They say this is okay because some thoughts are good and some thoughts are bad. They never explained how we know what thoughts are good and what thoughts are bad. There was no standard on their side of the house. It was a completely arbitrary assertion. They had to meet the burden we gave them in PMC to explain why they wouldn't defend banning hating capitalism, or banning being a Democrat. They never explained that. Second, these are impermissible because they're merely retributive. We told you that hate cannot be deterred, but that it's like love, that it's irrational and ingrained and enduring. They did not respond to this at all. It's true in the round that hate cannot be deterred. We told you further that prison fucking isn't rehabilitative. So, they're merely retributive. Why is it impermissible to be merely retributive? Because one, we can never know how much retribution is acceptable, because we simply are incapable of making that moral determination, and 2, because there's no entitlement to just desserts. We gave you 2 warrants for this, and neither of them were beaten. We told you that it is incoherent to think that a person should be punished more for punching a delicate person than punching a durable person, because the person could not have known in advance whether a person was delicate or durable, and incorporated that into their intentions. So, because, and further, this is retributive merely on the basis of who a person is, not even on the basis of the acts themselves. That, we tell you, is inconsistent with the standards and principles of our criminal justice system. But if you don't buy any of that, let's talk about why these have terrible consequences for oppressed communities. We told you in PMC that most of the oppression that exists in society is structural in nature and completely unrelated to hate crimes. Most minorities will never be the victim of a hate crime, but most of them face structural oppression. This warranting was dropped. Let's talk about structural oppression. We told you that they stymie real progress on their side of the house in the effort to fight structural oppression, because they create a sense of false solvency, because it is simply the case that people regularly deny the existence of racism today, and this is abhorrent. This is why people oppose things like police reform. This is why it is impossible to indict a police officer after they shoot a man in the street. Only on our side of the house can we achieve that reform. Why is this the case? Because only on our side of the house are racists forced to question, or people in general forced to question, that racism still exists today. Are people forced to question the idea that we haven't actually fixed it because we've elected a black president? Only on our side of the house do people who shoot up churches have KKK manifestos in their backpacks. Only on our side of the house do these people not go to enormous ends to hide their hatred. Note that this is conceded by them. The sort of deterrence that they get, and they defend this, is a sort of deterrence where people mask their hatred but commit the same crimes. They commit the same number of crimes against these communities, they just pretend that the crimes weren't hate-motivated. This enables the denial of the existence of hatred and stymies the ability of legislators to enact reform to remedy structural oppression. So they ask us, they give us a question, why is it okay to have protected classes? The answer is simple. Protected classes work at remedying historical inequities. We defend measures that work to remedy historical inequities. We don't defend measures that make things worse. When they tell us about sending a positive signal, we ask them, well, okay, but what signal does it send when you do something that makes things worse in the name of making things better? Once you recognize that it makes things worse, it doesn't send a positive signal anymore. They tell us that there's going to be these riots and this vigilante justice when there's no help. What are these people going to think when... What?
Any response might be interesting, but I did not see a single response to extrajudicial justice.
Dan MG.
Yes.
It's an MG.
That's what I said. Extrajudicial justice is what happens when there isn't a conviction.
Sorry, Dave, what are you calling you?
So I'm saying that...
All the Jews.
What was your answer?
So, hold on. What are you calling me first?
Any response to extrajudicial justice and the impacts of that, which is loss of rights for the victim. And
Okay, all right. So I responded to that towards the bottom of the off case by saying that the extrajudicial justice is what you see when there aren't convictions, which occur when you don't remedy broader societal problems because hate crime laws are.
So that might mean like effects of what you think are going to happen in extrajudicial justice and like an offensive level. But you never told us why our impacts or awards were true.
Okay.
So I was about to
What's the
repeat...
argument you just made?
I was about to repeat precisely the words that Dan just said, which were the words in MG. The
Okay.
reason that... What?
Take it under consideration by every member of the panel.
So, the problem with their extrajudicial justice argument is that people do that when they're unsatisfied with a lack of structural reform. They don't get structural reform, so this is worse on their side of the house. We explained why they don't get structural reform, because there simply isn't the political will in a world where the vast majority of Americans think racism ended in 2008 in November. So, we told you why...
Yeah, this was a new one. Okay, so, their argument that people like structural change, and therefore...
This is the top of the first independent point in PNC.
Hang on. Okay, so, the argument...
Second independent point, rather.
Okay, so, the argument that people want structural change, and this doesn't create structural change, is an argument that they make. Tying it to now, that's a reason why they're going to have the same impacts of extrajudicial justice, which we talked about, I think is entirely...
So the argument... at the top of the second independent point of PMC is that we get more structural change, we get more institutional reform. In the MG, Dan explained that that the lack of structural change, the lack of institutional reform, is what causes not extrajudicial justice per se, but violence and riots and such on the part of minority communities. That's what Dan said in MG. That's the argument I'm making.
You guys all good?
Everyone will take it
Cool. Under consideration then.
Okay. So, they don't get any assistance. But what else do they get? They actually get more hate crimes. There are literally more crimes committed against these communities on their side of the house. We gave you 2 warrants for this, and both of them are dropped. First, we told you that these laws are used as recruiting tools by hate groups because the hate groups use the message that they're actually persecuted and rejected by society as a means to recruit. So they get more hate criminals that way. Second, we told you that when you put these people in prison for longer periods of time, they blame the groups that convicted them of the hate crimes. They blame, or not that convicted them, but they blame the groups that they attacked that results in the hate crime conviction for their additional time in jail, which makes them more likely to commit hate crimes in the future when they get out, which means that more crimes are committed against these communities in their side of the house. So I asked them again, what's the signal when you actually get more hate crimes? Why is that a good signal? What do minorities think when they are getting more crimes because of the token measure that you've instituted we're proud to propose?
Here, here.
Yeah, everybody leave.
Everyone out.
What up?
What?
Good round.